David Smith, our local MP, in the studio this morning. And we are going to be talking about rural living. A couple of big reports come out recently. One which David's going to tell us about from the Labour Rural Research Group, but also one from the County Council's Director of Public Health on healthcare in Northumberland, particularly rural issues. And I'll just start with a quote, really. From too many policymakers and too many departments in Whitehall, rurality is a persistent blind spot, rendering rural poverty invisible. Yet for millions of people across our countryside and coastal communities, hardship is not the exception, it's a daily reality. I so wish that had been my quotes, but it's not. It's Jenny Riddell-Carpenter, who I know you know well, who is an MP in Suffolk. A good way to start the discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Jenny is the chair of the Labour Rural Research Group, and I'm the secretary. She's a good colleague. The Rural Research Group is about 40-odd Labour backbench MPs who originally came together actually around, an issue we talked about last time, the inheritance tax reforms that the government was proposing at the time, but has gone on to become a group looking at what does it mean to be living in a rural part of the country, what are the additional challenges, what are the additional opportunities, and how do we put them at the heart of the Labour government.
And I saw a reference, and it was an interesting one, because I remember elections ago, the infamous Blue Wall, and then you talk about the rural wall. I mean, it has been a big change in the makeup of Parliament for rural constituencies. Yeah,
I mean, to be quite honest, most people historically looking back wouldn't think rural areas equals Labour MPs, would they? But actually there's well over 100 MPs now, Labour MPs, who have a predominantly rural seat. And obviously that includes somewhere like Northumberland. So there has been a big change, and it's just really important for us to be putting the issues of rural living, like I say, at the heart of government.
So you have brought out your reports. What are the issues that you've highlighted in it, and what recommendations are you making? So there's quite a few of them, so don't go through all of them.
I won't go through all of them. The latest report that we released was on rural poverty research, which is great because the good thing about it, because it's such a wide group of MPs, we can go directly to constituents and ask their opinion. We can do focus groups, but we can also get them to feed directly into the reports, and then we can put that straight to government. So on the poverty thing, I think one that really sticks out is the sort of rural premium. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Rural households spend on average £39 per week more on transport, £6 per week more on food, and energy costs are about £800 higher compared with London. So that's just, energy, food, transport, straight into it. It costs more to live in a rural area. What can we do about that? And the area of the report that we might want to focus on is the transport, health and education in particular. There are three big things that we need a rural dimension on all of those issues.
So let's start with transport. I guess if you live Alnwick, Berwick, Morpeth, next to the railway line, it's not bad. One or two campaigners that say not good enough. But once you get away from the railway lines, the bus network's not great.
Yeah.
A long way to public transport often. Yeah. And if people can't drive, even if they can, it's quite a long way. But if they can't drive, it gets to be very expensive with taxis and other forms, doesn't it? What can be done?
That's right. Well, bus networks integrating with trains, integrating with active travel, this is the key thing. So integrated transport. And as you say, bus networks are really poor in somewhere like Northumberland. I was quite excited by the Bus Services Act 2025 that the government has passed. What that does is it enables local authorities and mayoral authorities to implement sort of public control over buses. What that means then is that they can set routes, they can set fares, and they can ensure that private companies that they contract to have to cover the less popular routes. So I think that's a really, really important aspect of what we can do around transport. That can then link to the trains. We've seen the massive success of the Northumberland line. Credit where it's due. Over 1 million customers in its first year. I would love to see a Northumberland line. I was speaking to Network Rail this week about the need to improve the numbers of services out of places like Chathill, Pegswood, Acklington, etc. But ultimately we need infrastructure investment in the railway as well through Northumberland. So if we can integrate these different aspects of transport, we can improve it, but we need to start from the acknowledgement that it's transport is a bigger challenge for people living in rural areas.
And I think part of it's those they have to go to see adapting the way they work. I mean, hospitals traditionally like patients in at 7:30 in the morning. If you're living in a Northumberland village, even if you're in Berwick actually with the train service, it's going to be a struggle, isn't it? And people have got to learn to adapt. And it is this issue, isn't it, that sometimes people in big towns and big cities don't understand the realities of life out there.
That's right, and one of the other areas of this report on rural poverty that we picked out was healthcare, for exactly those reasons. And again, it does connect so much to transport, but sparsity, where people are, and therefore how they can access those services. Pleased to see that the hospital in Berwick is moving along again, but ultimately, you've got to travel for a lot of services. I've been making the case to the Northumbria Healthcare Trust for them to have as wide a suite of services in Alnwick and in Berwick as possible, because what we don't want where it's not necessary is for constituents to be travelling down to Tyne and Wear. There will always be some things with high specialisms that are in the big hospitals in Tyne and Wear. But ultimately, we want as many of the opportunities to get diagnosis and core procedures that they need in places like Berwick, Alnwick. So that's the prize, really. Yeah, and not only hospitals, but as close back to the GP as possible as well, with the NHS 10-year plan of prevention rather than cure, which is for me essential, but also away from hospital and into the community. Well, the neighbourhood centres, I'm glad you brought it up, a key area of the 10-year plan. We need to make sure that those integrated, again, there's that word, neighbourhood hubs, neighbourhood health centres, where you can get social care connected to community care, connected to primary care. I want to see as many of those. They're already being rolled out. Some are being piloted in the northeast. I want to see some of them in our communities, so that you don't actually have to go to hospital necessarily. That primary care is key. Yeah, and there's a lot of things I think can be done in primary care, but there's just this traditional boundary, and probably not helped by the marketisation of the NHS, but I could go on about that forever, that has created these boundaries that need to be knocked down, really, don't they? Yeah. For the third time in a short amount of time, I'm going to say the word integration again. It's just so important. And actually, yes, I mean, I've never been a fan of the marketisation of the NHS. It needs to be, it's a public good, so you need to make sure it works in specific places rather than as a sort of standard across the country. Yeah. So education was the third tenet you wanted to pick up on. Yeah, that's right. And equally, it's interesting how much it keeps coming back to transport as a theme. Somewhere like Duchess, I think it has one of, if not the largest catchment area in the country. You're having kids travelling from all over Northumberland, well over an hour in each direction each day. And so that's a big challenge in and of itself. So that adds additional cost to the schools themselves. So we need to keep that under consideration. It's also true of special educational needs, which is a very topical issue that lots of parents in North Northumberland care a great deal about. On that issue, I'm very pleased to see in the new white paper around SEND this idea of experts at hand, which is making sure that there's well over £1 billion being put to the side to say, okay, as much as possible, let's keep children with special educational needs in mainstream, but put the support around them. And so the government's got this funding stream to enable these experts at hand, people that can support them in school. Because actually, if it's down to the logistics of having specialist centres everywhere, which will remain, somewhere like Barndale, for example, in Alnwick, but we need to have, because of the growth of special educational needs provision, we need to make sure that we use the mainstream system as well as possible and put the resource in there. So that's, again, in a rural setting, a particular challenge, but I think that will make a big difference. Yeah. And these things are all interlinked, don't they? Northumberland's become a place to retire, very popular, not surprisingly. It's very beautiful and lovely area to live. But that then puts pressure on housing costs, it puts pressure
on the schools because there are fewer young people, and then are the schools financially viable? And if they come through it, there aren't probably the jobs to retain them in the area either. So it's needs quite a lot of joined up thinking, doesn't it?
It does, and that's why a pressure group, essentially like Labour Rural Research Group, is so important, because we need to look at all of those connected issues and then how they play out in, not just somewhere like inner city Birmingham, for example, not especially to pick on that, but in an area where these additional challenges require a different approach.
Yeah. So what's the group going to do next?
So we are actually at the moment just advertising a call for evidence on a report on the rural economy. So if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see that we're putting out that call for evidence. All the other MPs involved in it are as well. We hope that sometime over the next couple of months we'll be producing that report to say, how does the economy in rural areas work and what can we do to support it?
And people can respond to that, and you'd like them to.
That's right, yeah. There's already a link has gone out on my Facebook page. We'll be putting out a few more times, but do go on there, and if you've got a view on the rural economy, we'd like to hear about it.
So now for some questions for David that you've sent in. Thank you for your questions. We've got one or two that we've picked up from last month that we didn't quite manage to squeeze in, but some that have come for today. And, a bit of a crazy week in Westminster Village, I think it'd be fair to say. So 2 questions, both on the same subject. One from Colin: do you support Keir Starmer regarding the Mandelson scandal? And from Kim: shouldn't Keir Starmer resign after recent events around Peter Mandelson? Your thoughts, David?
Thanks, Richard. You said it yourself. It's been a crazy week. I go as far as saying it's been probably the lowest week for me personally since in politics since I became an MP. It's been tough. In terms of the first question, look, Keir Starmer made a serious error of judgment in appointing Mandelson. I felt that from the outset, as in from the moment he was appointed. And it's proven to be the case that it was a real serious error of judgment. The Prime Minister has twice acknowledged that this week in the Chamber. I've sat and listened to him acknowledge the fact that he should never have been appointed. It was a error of judgment, and that he took responsibility for that. And I respect him standing up in front of the Commons and the nation to say that. And he's right. I agree with him. It was a serious error of judgment. In terms of where that leaves us, politics is all about judgment. And if you are a Prime Minister, you're making judgments all the time. And just as he's made a serious error of judgment in appointing Mandelson and has acknowledged that, he's also made a good judgment on the Iran crisis, for example. I fully support the position that he's taken, that the government has taken on that. So we're at this moment, this critical moment where, and we might go on to this in some of the other questions, where everything that's happening in Iran is feeding through into people's lives now. It's challenging the economy, it's challenging the cost of living. And we're also, so that's the government side. From the Labour Party side, which is obviously part of it as well, we're less than 2 weeks out from the biggest electoral moment since July 2024 in terms of local elections around the country, including here in the North East, the Scottish Parliament elections, the Senate elections. So I think those things, the Iran crisis and from a Labour Party perspective, the election, they need to be our focus at this point. And we don't want to become the shambles of the end of the last government, where it was just a total inward-looking focus on who's the leader. I think we need to focus on what matters.
I suspect that's a topic we will come back to, but we'll just change subject for a moment. From Shirley, the government recently published its National Youth Strategy, bringing with it a lot of funding for youth services nationally, yet she says Northumberland specifically excluded as an eligible area, except for Amble. So looking at how youth services are badly needed and underfunded in areas like South East Northumberland, and I'd probably add rural Northumberland to that as well, actually, what can be done to get the needs of our young people recognised? Yeah,
so I speak as a former youth worker. So my first proper job in Northern Ireland was as a youth worker for a few years. So it's a matter very close to my heart. And one of the reasons probably really I came into politics, that's because of that experience. Sadly, 98% of youth services were cut by the county council since 2011. So we start from a very challenging position. That's why I tried to spend as much time in youth services around the county, like NE66, Gallery Youth here in Alnwick, Berwick Youth Project, and others in Amble and elsewhere. Look, I think the government's taking the right approach at this point, which is to put the resource that is available into youth employment. So that's the focus at the moment. The youth guarantee, making sure that people 18 to 24 who have been on universal credit can get guaranteed placements, putting funding aside for apprenticeships and for the appointments of young people in that age bracket to small and medium-sized businesses, up to £3,000. Actually, if you combine the apprenticeship and the others, it can be up to £5,000. So trying to essentially create the conditions for young people to get employment and the skills that they need. I know that's not the same as all the other range of youth services that can be available, but you mentioned in your intro about youth employment. I want young people to be able to have a future here in Northumberland and anywhere in Northumberland. I don't want them to feel that they have to go away to London or the big cities or even Tyne and Wear to make it in life. Or even if they do, I want them to be able to come back and feel that they've got an opportunity. So I think that's the right approach at this point, but over time I would like to see more direct funding for that wider, more holistic range of youth services.
Our next question comes from Kay. Not sure, but I've got a funny feeling she might live in Berwick. I was wondering if our local councils have a cleaning programme of work for the town streets. Of course, living amongst the seagulls does have its ups and downs, but when things are bad, the streets, shop windows and buildings look a mess and unhygienic. Is there anything in place to keep our pavements and walkways cleaner? You have to be good at dodging the seagull poop whilst shopping. I feel like every time I go to Berwick, so that is your patch.
Well, it's one of the risks of living on the coast, isn't it? Yes, although we're a bit more inland, obviously, here in Alnwick as we speak, but the seagulls do get everywhere. Look, this is a county council issue in terms of that's the responsibility. So, pressure washing, mechanical scrubbers are used on services to get rid of the mess. And obviously it can worse during peak tourist seasons. Excuse me. So I'd urge you to contact the council if you've any problems with that. I sometimes can follow up on that. So let me know how you get on, but do contact the council because that is their responsibility.
And good luck with that one. Stevie, the government said it will be easier to get a GP appointment. This is not true. Why have I had to wait weeks for a routine appointment?
Well, look, I'm sorry, Stevie, that you've had to you've had a long wait. Clearly, this is one of the key issues that the government inherited in terms of the pressures on the NHS. GP services are improving. In 2025, they offered 8 million more appointments than in 2024. That's the national figure. If you look at here in the northeastern Yorkshire has the most people being seen in 18 weeks. With 70% of people being treated in that time frame, which is much faster than London or the South East. I appreciate, that it doesn't feel like that if you personally are having to wait. That's always a challenge. But actually, the top line figures show that it's improving nationwide and improving here in the North East and Northumbria. And just to say, specifically, Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust has the third shortest waiting time in the UK. I was speaking to the Chief Executive of Northumbria Healthcare Trust yesterday. They're doing a great job, but that doesn't mean to say that there's not a lot to improve.
Next subject, another favourite in the postbag. There's a long version and a short version. We'll do the short version. I'll read the short version first, then the long version, and David can respond. Very apt after yesterday's news, one from Kevin. What's happened to smashing the gangs? But one from Liz and Jonathan composite. Why are illegal people treated better than pensioners who've paid their taxes for a lifetime by getting many things that we would like but can't afford when most should be deported immediately, or are we all wrong? Different perspective. With the cost of living and public services shown as more concern to voters, do you think immigration and asylum are overplayed as political issues? Feels like this week Peter Mandelson's been overplayed as a political issue, but I take the point in terms of balance. The headline of the day is does become very dominant, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that, Richard. We could spend the whole show on those questions. First thing I would say is, sometimes I think the issue of immigration is overplayed by people that want to weaponise it, and people that, frankly, can be xenophobic and racist. Obviously not your questioners, but there are people out there that are behaving in that way, and I think. And at the same time, immigration is a major issue, and it has been for a number of years. And I think successive governments have failed to deal with it. In the last Conservative government, the biggest flux in immigration came from legal migration. So we can talk about illegal migration in a moment and the boats and the rest of it, but in 2023 a net 1 million people came to the country because of a political decision that the last government made about essentially suppressing wages. So 300,000 of that million came in just to do social care, rather than us deciding as a country, we're going to pay more for social care. No, that's not a nice choice, but I think people doing social care is a brilliant and important and honourable work, and they should be paid properly, and we shouldn't be seeking to bring people in from the rest of the world to sort of undercut wages so that we can do that essential function in society. But at the same time, therefore, at the same time, actually, the numbers of legal migration are massively down. So that's net 300,000, still too high, but it is definitely on a downward trend. So I think that's the right thing, and it's a good thing. I would say, just back to the point about pensioners, I think it's a false dichotomy at one level. I don't think you put these two things against each other. I mean, the triple lock remains. If you're in the new state pension, in the last week, it's gone up by £575 over the course of the year. We're still making the warm homes discount available, winter fuel payment, which I'm sure we can talk about, but it is, a tax-free payment of £100 to £300 for households that qualify. So there's, the government's still doing a huge amount for pensioners. And then just to try to touch on the smash the gangs thing, actually there has been some decent progress on that. The first full week of April, ending the 12th, we prevented 313 people from entering the country in small boats. In 2025, 22,500 people were prevented from crossing. That's by having relationships with countries like Germany, where we've persuaded them to, make it illegal to sell certain types of boats that are critical in the crossings, and etc. It's not a one lever that you can pull. It's a wide range of things that the government has to act on. And just to say, in the new King's Speech, there's likely to be a bill on immigration where it's going to start bringing in the massive changes, the biggest changes in a generation that the Home Secretary wants to bring in. So there's more to do, and we're not where we want to be, but I would say we're making progress.
So the big deal with France yesterday, do you think that will make a difference, or was it headline grabbing?
I think it will make a difference, but we need to see that difference. And inherent in the deal is that if it doesn't start to make the difference, then we claw back some of the money. And I think that's a really important change. There has to be a performance level agreement. Look, it's worth saying as well, the only is just make a political point. The only reason we have this situation with the boats in France is because of Brexit. Now, you can take a different view on that. I voted Remain, a campaign for Remain. I have a sort of, I do not want us to go back to the European Union. That is done. But we're still dealing with the consequences of that moment, because pre-Brexit, we could actually just send people coming in boats back. That was part of the arrangement they already had. So we're still unpicking that, and it's amazing that that event, 10 years on, essentially, is still determining so much of our politics.
Yeah. Next one's from Lynn. Different subjects, and this goes back a long way. Unfortunately, the government of the day has to deal with it. Is the scandal of maladministration by DWP of the increase in state pension age for women born in the 1950s as big a scandal as the Post Office Fidgets and Horizon story? And is compensation now due?
I thought you were going to say something else there, Richard. So it's been another huge scandal that we've inherited, along with the infected blood scandal, the Horizon scandal that you mentioned. There's other scandals out there, long historic ones about the nuclear veterans. No government can solve all of the problems of the last 40, 50 years in one term. It's just not possible. And so we were talking earlier about priorities and decisions and judgments. the government did decide to put £10 billion aside for the infected blood scandal, rightly, for example, and have been, very active on the Horizon scandal, and there's compensation for postmasters, etc. I think the decision around, but declaration of interest, what I'm getting used to saying as a politician, my mum's a WASPy woman, so it's not that I don't know about the impact or effect of this of women of state pension age of a particular bracket. The Ombudsman and then the government's response to it has been pretty clear. I don't expect it to move. That's why things like the triple lock, making sure that we are supporting pensioners, especially women of state pension age, who affected by this in a more holistic way. I think that's the solution. I've engaged hugely with the WASPy campaign since before I became an MP. Since, I wrote to the government on multiple occasions asking them to see what they could do around this. If anything changes, we'll continue to. I just don't think any government can do everything at once.
So, final question before we go for some music, and I'm going to go slightly out of order here. One from Chris. The government's contemplating the removal of trial by jury in some cases. The poor and marginalised, he says, depend on a fair jury system, and it seems bizarre that the government's proposing this change. What are your views?
So I've spoken on this in Parliament. I should say again, I for a time volunteered or was looking to become a magistrate. Pre-politics a while ago, went through the whole process, was accepted. So didn't end up being a magistrate because actually the then government decided to freeze recruitment on magistrates. But I say that to say I've seen the process and how good magistrates are. Probably most of your listeners, I don't know if they're aware that about 97-98% of all trials are not jury trials already, as it is. And one of the things that so it's not a massive change to say there's another further small percentage won't have jury trials for if you have a potential sentence of 3 years or less. So there will continue to be jury trials for the most serious concerns, but we have this massive backlog of cases. About 80,000. In 2019, it was 38,000 backlog in cases. And at the moment, what we inherited is about 80,000. So in order to speed the process through, and justice delayed is justice denied. And I really believe that this is the right approach to address that, alongside a holistic range of other things like more court dates and making sure that prison transport works and a wide range of things. The one thing that I'd probably add, which I've not said before, is I would be quite happy to see a sunset clause on this, so that once we can get that backlog down, we can start expanding again access to jury trials. But otherwise, generally, I think it is the right approach.
David Smith, our guest in the studio this morning. I should say latest local news coming up at 10 o'clock. And unless he says something very controversial in the next 6 minutes, David won't be in the local news today. But he regularly is, often because of things that you've said or asked in Parliament. So it felt appropriate to just you to explain to us how you go about getting questions asked in the House of Commons and raising local issues.
Well, let's see what we can do in the next 6 minutes about the controversy. So the way it works, there's lots of things that you can do. But really, the thing that people see the most is if you stand up in the House of Commons chamber and you ask a question. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. The first thing is, if it's an oral questions for a department, say the Foreign Office or the Home Office, they come on a cycle. So they're on a sort of 2 to 3 week cycle because there's so many departments and they all have to have their time. So it comes up. You've got a week to apply to be on what's called the order paper, which lists what's the business of Parliament that day. You're pulled out of a hat. If you're on, maybe 20 questions for each department, 20 people will be able to ask, 20 MPs from all parties. The Speaker tries to go back and forth between government and opposition parties. So there's a lots of factors. So the first thing is, are you pulled out of the hat? And I regularly put in to be pulled out of the hat on almost all departments, but you're sometimes not pulled out of that. If you are, and you're in the first maybe 12 questions, you've got a good chance of thinking, yes, I'll probably get in the limited time that there is for that. The other thing that you can do, which I do quite regularly, is called bobbing. I won't demonstrate because I'll go away from the mic, but it's literally, standing up and down. And when sometimes, and especially if you write to the speaker and say, I've got a really urgent question about my constituency or about an issue I'm passionate about that I'd like to ask about, he'll sometimes say, right, I'll let them in if they bob, which is just standing up to say, look, I want to ask a question. So that's really how questions asked. I asked a question on Wednesday. There was a statement that was slightly different from departmental questions. There was about procurement, and then you just bob for that. So you're just standing up and going, hello, Mr. Speaker, please pick me.
Yeah. I was going to ask, because it's that classic phrase, isn't it, catching the speaker's eye?
Yes.
Do you just wave madly or smile nicely? How do you do it?
I think if you waved, that would put you to the bottom of the queue. I think there might be intense eye contact. Is what you're trying to catch. You are trying to catch his eye. But also the speaker had, or Madam Deputy Speaker, so her eye. But the speaker has his clerks and his staff that are beside him, and they're also trying to help him or her organise, who they pick next. So it's a bit of a combination of catching their eye, maybe telling them before in a nice handwritten note, I would like to ask a question, please consider me. It's a range of things.
So you were elected on the classic first past the post system, people over 18. Proposals to change 18 to 16, a lot of clamour for going from first past the post to proportional representation. Both of those, do you think we've got the right system at the moment, or do you think it's time to move on either?
So I've got specific views on both of those things, which I'll tell you about, but the first thing to say is I think we need significant constitutional reform, and I wouldn't you've got to start somewhere, but I almost wouldn't want to take individual issues and say, we need to do this or we need to do that. I really think our politics and the constitutional politics, I'm not talking about party politics, although this probably is true of that as well, needs a real refresh, needs a real look at it again. Does this work for our country now in 2026? So House of Lords reform, I'd really like to see an elected upper house and much smaller. 800 is the second largest upper chamber in the world. So we need that smaller elected, and we can look at that. That's one example. But then into that, yes, comes things like proportional representation as well. I'm open to proportional representation. It works elsewhere in the country, in Scotland, Wales, and some other elections. It has pluses and minuses too. It's not a silver bullet, but I am certainly open to it, and it depends because there's so many different systems when you talk about PR. It's not just one thing. On votes for 16-year-olds, look, it was a manifesto commitment. It will be brought in. I would say I'm not extremely enthusiastic about it, being direct. I think that there's a challenge that we've got, which is, yes, how do we get young people involved in politics and engaged in politics, which is a real problem, and how do we square that with the maturity necessary to make choices that affect us all? So it's a tricky one, that.
And one we could talk about again in the weeks to come.